Okay. All right, so let's go to this next story here. I talked about, well, we know that George H.W. Bush passed away. It was a couple Fridays ago, I think it was. And there was a good article from Huffington Post, HuffingtonPost.com. George H.W. Bush, White House, once ordered drug buy from teen for presidential TV stunt. George H.W. Bush once ordered drug buy from a teenager for presidential TV stunt. A black high schooler was sentenced to 10 years in prison over the incident that has recirculated after the president's death. Okay, so this article came out December 1st, 2018. So the Friday night death of former President George H.W. Bush has opened a wellspring of tributes from famous friends and foreign dignitaries, commending the generous friend, accomplished politician, and skilled diplomat they saw in the 41st president, contrasting with so much praise in one particularly appalling anecdote that has also bubbled to the surface from the depths of the Bush White House so-called war on drugs. The war on drugs. So the war on drugs originally goes back to June 17, 1971, declared by Richard Nixon. That was exactly 1 year before the Watergate break-in, which was June 17, 1972. And it was 2 years and 2 months from the Watergate break-in that Nixon announced his resignation August 8, 1974. He resigned 12 noon the next day. I think the same thing's going to happen to Trump. So George H.W. Bush, as you may not know, once used the Drug Enforcement Agency to lure an African-American high school student to Lafayette Park near the White House to make a drug buy that the president would use to illustrate a public health crisis on national TV. So the student at the time was 19-year-old Keith Jackson. And he received a 10-year prison sentence as University of Baltimore assistant history professor Joshua Clark Davis detailed in a series of viral tweets. Now, from his desk in the Oval Office on September 5th, 1989, George H.W. Bush held up a bag of the rocky white substance and declared, quote, "This is crack cocaine, seized a few days ago in a park across the street from the White House," end quote. Now, it could have easily been heroin or PCP, he said. Okay, so the idea to obtain the drug as a prop for television had come from aides, some of his aides, during the president's summer retreat in Maine. And this was reported by the Washington Post a couple of weeks after this took place. And George H.W. Bush quickly latched on to it. The televised bag of crack would help launch the president's ramped up effort in the war on drugs by showing how pervasive the issue supposedly was. But Keith Jackson didn't normally sell drugs in Lafayette Park. He didn't sell drugs. Lafayette Park, from my understanding, is like right across from the White House. Okay? He normally didn't sell drugs there. They set this up to then dramatize and say, oh, they're selling drugs right across the street from the White House. Oh, we need to wrap up the war on drugs, which means we need more funding from Congress. Yet the manufactured drug buy serves as a sobering reminder of the war on drugs targeting of marginalized communities. Why didn't he set up somebody white? Why didn't he set up? I know you in Washington D.C. is Chocolate City. They couldn't find a white drug dealer to set up. Yet everybody's quiet. Yet the manufactured drug buy serves as a sobering reminder of the war on drugs targeting of marginalized communities, along with the strain it has placed on the nation's justice system since former President Richard Nixon announced it in the 1970s. It was June 17th, 1971. I've done a lecture dealing with the history of Richard Nixon's war on drugs. He declared that in front of Congress, and he was trying to get more funding. He was trying to convince Congress to fund his war on drugs. So the effort is also largely seen as a failure. The war on drugs is largely seen as a failure. Decades later, research shows the quote-unquote war has not been successful in reducing drug use in America, although it has markedly increased incarceration rates. We saw that under President Obama, incarceration rates were declining. We saw, as my broadcast I did earlier today, we saw in December 2015, we saw that the U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years. It dropped from a peak of 2.3 million down to 1.53 million. There's an article from Newsweek.com that talks about this, and it cites the Department of Justice report that came out December of 2016. The U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years under President Obama in December 2015. Nobody wants to talk about that, though. They want to give Trump, look at this. People want to give Trump credit for criminal justice reform that hasn't passed the U.S. Senate, that he did not support during midterm elections, that he did not campaign on that platform during 2016. They want to give Trump credit for this, but we see the incarceration rate of African Americans drop from 40% in the U.S. 40% prison population, U.S. prison population, down to 34%, and we see the overall U.S. prison population drop from 2.3 million down to 1.53 million under President Obama. Nobody wants to say anything. But you want to give Trump credit for doing a press conference for a bill that he didn't even help write. Because we know that it started in the House of Representatives. That bill passed the House of Representatives in May of 2018. So why is it stalling in the U.S. Senate right now? And as Associated Press reported, the article came out today, picked up by AtlantaBlackStar.com, is Senator Mitch McConnell, son of a Mitch, from Kentucky, who's blocking the bill. What's holding it up? Mitch McConnell appears to be blocking bipartisan criminal justice bill. Imagine that. December 9th, 2018, Associated Press, picked up by AtlantaBlackStar.com. Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's reluctance to hold a vote on a popular criminal justice bill has angered top Republican senators and created an unusual rift with a longtime GOP ally, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. Now, both these men are old as hell. I mean, Chuck Grassley is 85. You know, you got Orrin Hatch, who's about 85. I think he's retiring. Hopefully he is. And Mitch McConnell looks like he's 85. You know, doesn't he look like Granny from the Beverly Hillbillies? Mitch McConnell, right? So Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa has spent years working to build a coalition around the bill and is pushing for a year-end vote. And Grassley says more than 2/3 of the Senate supports this bill. But Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, which is one of the poorest, sickest states in the country, sick as far as health, is refusing to bring the legislation forward in a standoff that's dividing the Republican majority and putting Donald Trump on the spot. But remember, Donald Trump withdrew his support right before the midterm elections, after he got the photo op of sitting there with these black pastors like Pastor John Gray, right? Because they came to the White House to find out about criminal justice reform, so he had all the media there, and he got the photo op with the black pastors, and then a few months after that, 2 or 3 months after that, he would withdraw support from the bill and says, let's pick this up after midterm elections. Why didn't you run on that during midterm elections and try to get African American votes? Because he wasn't serious about it in the first place. Jared Kushner was the one pushing this. It's interesting because I think Jared Kushner is going to go to prison. Imagine that. Just like his daddy went to prison. I think Jared Kushner is going to go to prison, and Jared Kushner is fighting for criminal justice reform. Maybe he thinks it's going to help him. I don't know. So, for the 85-year-old chairman, the Judiciary Committee, of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Chuck Grassley, this is not the way. This is not the way the Senate is supposed to operate. Okay, Chuck Grassley said we've done what needs to be done. So what's holding it up? So Grassley was expecting some deference from Senator Mitch McConnell after delivering on Trump's judicial nominees, right? Brett Kavanaugh, you know, remember the guy who loves to drink beer, chase women? Brett Kavanaugh, they put him on the Supreme Court. They've been confirming, there have been about 89 federal bench confirmations. There have been 89 out of about 145 nominations that Trump has done to the federal bench. They've been pushing through Republicans because they control the because they control the Senate, then they have a majority on the Senate Judiciary Committee, which does the hearings, and then they take the open vote in the U.S. Senate, and they control a majority in the U.S. Senate. So if they vote along party lines, then Republicans are going to confirm Trump's nominations. So Grassley's saying, well, hey, we've been playing ball. We've been confirming all these ultra-conservative, very young white males. You've been sending us to confirm for the federal bench to change the landscape of the federal bench. We've been doing that. So why wouldn't you play ball with us on criminal justice reform? So Trump backs the criminal justice bill also, but McConnell says it's divisive. His reluctance to take up Grassley's priority shows the limits of the Senate's old-fashioned customs in an era of heightened partisan politics. Okay, so check out the rest of this article here. And one of the things they talk about, and I've talked about this before, when we understand the war on drugs, right? Especially we go back to 94 with the Clinton crime bill. Most of that was written by Senator Joe Biden. Nobody wants to talk about that. That was signed September 13th, 1994. But 87% of the people who went to prison under Bill Clinton went under state law, not federal law. That crime bill was federal law. So, as this article from the Associated Press explains, roughly 90% of prison inmates are held in state facilities and will not be affected by this legislation. Legislation is important because it's federal law. That crime bill dealt with, the crime bill from Bill Clinton that people think caused mass incarceration, and it didn't cause mass incarceration. If you actually do the research, mass incarceration go back to 1971 because states had already started passing longer, harsher sentences in the 1970s and 80s and going into the early 90s before the crime bill was signed in 94. Roughly 90% of prison inmates are held in state facilities and would not be affected by this legislation because it's federal legislation, not state legislation. While Jared Kushner has been meeting with senators on Capitol Hill, Donald Trump is also hearing from allies who are against legislation. Chief among them is Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, who's taken over really for Jeff Sessions, because Jeff Sessions is against any type of criminal justice reform. Senator Tom Cotton is against any type of criminal justice reform as well. And Cotton is warning senators that Republicans will be blamed if criminals are released and commit new crimes. What about the criminal sitting in the White House? What about that one? Quote, only thing worse than early release from prison of thousands of serious, violent, and repeat felons is to do that in a spending bill with no debate or amendments, forcing senators to either shut down government or let felons out of prison, end quote. Cotton tweeted this past Friday, the spending bill will need approval by December 21st to avoid a funding lapse days before Christmas. Happy holidays. Read this article from AtlantaBlackStar.com, written by the Associated Press. What's holding it up? Mitch McConnell appears to be blocking bipartisan criminal justice bill. Interesting. Who would have thought? Okay. Imagine that. All right. We're coming up here on the break. When we come back, we're going to get into this story dealing with Black China. Let me continue a little bit more with George H.W. Bush and the Bush White House setting up this African-American team to use the crack that he was selling as a prop. Okay? All right, so obtaining the drug was no small feat, the Washington Post reported. The DEA agent knew that Keith Jackson sold drugs in his neighborhood and surrounding area. But initially, Keith Jackson didn't even know where the White House was and had to be persuaded to come to Lafayette Park. That's how little crack cocaine was actually being sold around the White House. I mean, who would be dumb enough to go routinely go sell crack around the White House? Just think about that. Okay? So they set this young man up. As DEA agent William McMullen told the Washington Post outright, quote, we had to manipulate him to get him down there. It wasn't easy, end quote. Now, Keith Davis told the Huffington Post that although he recalled Bush's televised address from 1989, it wasn't until he was researching. Davis told Huffington Post that although he recalled Bush's televised address from 1989, it wasn't until he was researching for a book on activism that he learned about Keith Jackson, a 19-year-old who sold the drugs. Quote, the story of what happened to Keith Jackson got much less attention than the Oval Office address, okay, end quote, where Bush is holding up the crack cocaine. All right, we'll continue this on the other side of the break. Then we'll get to this other disturbing story of reality TV star Black China going to the motherland to promote white supremacy and sell them a skin lightening cream. Okay, listen to the African History Network show 9:10 a.m. Superstation. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sign up. You can register for the online courses that I teach. They're all on demand. Ancient Kemet, the Winter Solstice, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, so that's a 10-course online bundle pack. Is all on demand. Watch at your own pace, and you can watch from around the world. So check that out. That's on sale, $60, regularly $130. And then also we have the Africans that were here before Columbus. The Africans that were here before Columbus. 8 DVD bundle pack. Okay, that's on sale, $70. And that includes the double lecture I did with Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. And also includes a lecture from Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who wrote They Came Before Columbus. And we have one from Dr. John Henry Clark in there as well, dealing with Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. So that's at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, the Africans that were here before Columbus. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. And I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. You can watch us live right there. And some of the people listening, we have Eric and Tamika and Bruce, just a few of the people watching us. Also, watch us on 910 AM Superstation's Facebook fan page as well. All right, I want to let you know that we have to ask the question, why are Lansing officials trying to take away local control of zoning ordinances? Why are they trying to allow our precious cities to turn into possible wastelands and contaminated environments? It's time for us to tell the guys in Lansing to stay in their lane. Stay in their lane. We know what happens when the states take control of local power. They win and we lose. Enough is enough. Lansing, stop being greedy. Paid for by Kevin Adele, a concerned citizen. I want to let you know that coming up on December 27th at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, I'll be speaking at the Kwanzaa celebration that the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement is organizing. It's taking place 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., so I'll be the keynote speaker. And you don't want to miss that, so I'll deal with some of the history of Kwanzaa, how Kwanzaa is based upon traditional African first fruit harvest festivals coming out of Africa, coming out of ancient Kemet and Nubia, coming out of Nigeria amongst the Yoruba and amongst the Akan and Ghana, things of this nature. And then I'll tie that history, I'll tie that into the movie Black Panther and deal with how the film Black Panther relates to African history, African culture, language, spiritual systems, etc. We'll deal with some other things also. So that's December 27th, the second day of Kwanzaa, Kuji Chagalia, Self-Determination, Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And then on December 29th, 2018, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., I'll be at Birch Theater, 2739 Russell Street in Detroit, for the Kwanzaa Cooperative Economics Entrepreneurship Workshop, organized by the People's Action Committee, and I'll be speaking there as well. Okay. So we'll have this information sometime this week at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, so check us out there. And also at our website, we have the 8 DVD bundle pack, The Africans That Were Here Before Columbus. The Africans That Were Here Before Columbus, which deals with the African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. It includes a double presentation I did with Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. It includes a lecture by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who wrote They Came Before Columbus. Also one from Dr. John Henry Clark dealing with Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. Okay, all right. Let's go. Let's go quickly to the phone lines. Let's go to Lee, line 1. Hey, Lee, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Go ahead, Lee. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I was just surfing the channels here, and I came across your show. So first time listening. I haven't called in before. Not sure how your format goes, how much time I get, what topics you'd like to touch on, but to touch back on that comment that you would, or the story about the prison reform. Gotta give credit to Trump at least for trying to at least establish a foundation for the states to jump on board for this, you know. And
it's federal law, it's not state law. It's federal, it's not state law.
I understand that, but the states can also be persuaded possibly to join into this. You know, if it's going to happen on the federal level, it should happen on the state level, and everybody in the state, down to the state level, should be fighting to get these same things for the state prisoners. I know I was a state prisoner in Michigan. I understand how it works. You know, so I'm not saying that it can't happen, but then, you know, even if it's on a federal level and doesn't get to the state level, maybe they might be able to get some relief, you know, for some appeals, you know, based upon the new implementation of a law on the federal level. Maybe go back to the courts. You never know. It's a possibility. So at least Trump is trying. Nobody else has done anything. Nobody. It's always been break the families up. You know, it don't matter whether it's, you know, in the schools or like you say, introduce drugs to the, you know, the government is the one that's bringing the drugs in here. They're still doing it to this day.
Right. Let me ask you a question.
Not a white or black thing.
Well, it largely targets African Americans. Now it hits poor whites also. It disproportionately targets African Americans. It was written by those in House of Representatives like Representative Hakeem Jeffries out of New York. It wasn't written by Trump. One.
No,
Two.
I understand how law works. I know Trump didn't write anything.
Well, not only that, he didn't campaign on it during the 2016 election nor during midterm elections.
Well, I understand that, and you're absolutely right. And then, you know, I'm not trying to say that it's not an important issue. It's an extremely important issue in society, and to make it, you know,
I agree.
This country a better place for all, and make it as equal as it possibly can, because there is an unfair, you know, disadvantage for African Americans in this country, and anybody who denies it has either got their head in their backside, or they just don't care.
Right. So if we give credit for Trump for a bill that hasn't passed, then shouldn't we give credit to President Obama, because the U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years under President Obama? Not only that, it was Attorney General Eric Holder in 2013 that issued the Smart on Crime initiative that backed off of seeking the longest, harshest sentences for low-level nonviolent drug offenders. But that was reversed. That was reversed by Jeff Sessions, who was the Attorney General nominated by Donald Trump.
Well, that's why Jeff Sessions is no longer there, you know, because...
No, that's not why. No. What's your name again, Lee? Hold on just a second. I'm going to let you finish. That's not why Jeff Sessions is not there. No, Jeff Sessions is not there because Trump was angry that Sessions did not recuse himself from the Russia investigation. Yeah. No. The Russia investigation is existent. You may not know it.
There hasn't. This is why I don't want to get into this, because this is kind of like whataboutisms. It doesn't make any sense to waste our time and our energy and our efforts arguing or debating or splitting hairs over whataboutisms.
It's not a whataboutism. Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation because he slow down. Because of his context with Sergei Kislyak, who at the time was the Russian ambassador. That's fact. No, okay, thanks for calling, Lee. Thanks for calling, Lee. You need to go do more research for you calling here. I'm not one of these other talk show hosts, so you can't come run that nonsense on me. You need to Google my name so you know who you're dealing with. Let's go to Al, line 2. Al, welcome to the African History Network show. You need to go do some research before you call. You can call in here, Lee, but you need to go do some research before you call back in here. Let's go to Al, line 2. Welcome to the African History Network show.
How you doing, Mike?
What's up, man? You all right?
Proper documentation is all discussion.
Proper documentation ends all conversation. Yeah, he's being bombarded with Fox News and doesn't know how to go do research.
Yeah, but you're right though. He recused himself because he lied to the he get confirmed talking about he didn't have
in his Senate confirmation hearing.
Yeah, I know that. That's the reason why I actually lied.
I'm running the show.
Yeah.
I got to go.
But the thing, I understand what Trump was doing, but he was the one saying that he's the law and order president. So
yeah, he ran on that platform of law and order, which is the same platform Richard Nixon ran on in 1968.
I know that's the reason why when the gentleman, Mr. Lee, was on, I'm like, man, Mr. Lee kind of bummed a little bit, but I mean, he doesn't. I don't think he realized that Aaron Holder, Obama specifically had Aaron Holder and Loretta Lynch go, instead of going after a lot of these low-level crimes, he started going after the high crimes. So, I mean, people don't even give Obama credit for that. I mean,
oh, absolutely.
He got to realize that Obama wanted to end privatized prisons when Trump got back. When he won, he put the initiative back in. So,
right.
I mean, listen.
That deal with federal contracts. I talked about that earlier today. In August of 2016, President Obama announced that the federal government was not going to renew contracts with privatized prisons for federal prisoners.
Yes.
Trump reversed that when he came into office. And the reason why he reversed that is because Core Civic, which used to be called Corrections Corporation of America, and Geo Group, which used to be called Wackenhut, they donated almost $600,000 to Donald Trump's presidential campaign.
I mean, see, that's the stuff that I don't think Mr. Lee realized.
Well, don't dwell on the previous caller. Just go ahead and make your point, because I got other calls and I got other topics to get to. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I apologize about that. Well, I just wanted to say, I mean, it's smoke and mirrors. That's basically what I was trying to say. That's why I brought up the other incident that I want to just elaborate on. That's the reason why I called in. I just hope people had the information. That's the reason why I started the phrase proper documentation in all discussion. So
right.
I'll just leave it at that. You have a good one, Mike.
Okay. Thanks for calling. Let's go to John, line 3, quickly. John, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Mike, Jose, I'm calling from the east side of Detroit.
Go ahead.
Listen, Jose, why Jeff Sessions, that guy got his apple, mixing apples with oranges. Why Jeff Sessions is out, didn't want to put it, so go into with Trump like that. He was in the meeting when Russia was negotiating and so forth.
Hold on, he was what?
When Russia and all of them met together at Trump Plaza, Jeff Sessions was part of that. And that's why Jeff Sessions declined to defend Trump.
What meeting at Trump Plaza are you talking about? You're not talking about the one with Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr.
And his son, that's what I'm talking about.
I'm not aware of Jeff Sessions being at that meeting. Jeff Sessions had meetings. He had contacts with Sergei Kislyak, who was the UN, who was the Russian ambassador to the U.S. at the time. But Kislyak was not at that meeting that Donald Trump Jr. originally said was about Russian adoptions, which is really about the Makinsky Act. I think it's called. I forgot how to exactly pronounce it. So I'm not aware of Jeff Sessions being at that meeting, but he had contacts with and meetings with the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak, and he was not forthcoming in his his Senate confirmation hearing to confirm him to be Attorney General. And then the other thing was also because he was part of the Trump campaign, because of these things taking place, he had to recuse himself from the Russian investigation. Okay, So, and Trump was furious. Trump said if he had known that Sessions was going to recuse himself, he would have nominated somebody else. He said, what kind of man is this?
That's right. Well, but from what I hear, Jeff Sessions attended more than one meeting at Club. That's what they say now. But you know what they say, they say a lot.
Right.
I just wanted to let you know that Jeff Sessions was about to say that he was about to get trapped in his own scheme, that they scared him away and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the report out and so. But I just want to thank you for educating people to knowledge that.
Okay. All right, John. Thanks for calling. Got to run. All right. So let's go back to the story about George H.W. Bush and the Bush White House. Bush Sr. setting up this African-American 19-year-old named Keith Jackson. And he was lured to Lafayette Park to sell crack cocaine. Okay? Lured there by the DEA. So, this is an article from HuffingtonPost.com. And Roland Martin talked about this on Roland Martin Unfiltered also, which is his daily digital show. Follow him on Facebook at Roland Martin and YouTube as well, Roland Martin. And you can go back and watch the videos there, broadcast of the show. George H.W. Bush, White House once ordered drug buy from teen for presidential TV stunt. And the article goes on to say, obtaining the drug was no small feat, the Washington Post reported. The DEA knew that Keith Jackson, 19-year-old, sold drugs in his neighborhood and surrounding area. But initially, Keith Jackson didn't even know where the White House was and had to be persuaded to come to Lafayette Park. That's how little crack cocaine was actually being sold around the president's home. A DEA agent named William McMullen told the Washington Post outright, quote, we had to manipulate him to get him down there. It wasn't easy, end quote. Now, Davis told Huffington Post that although he recalled George H.W. Bush's televised address from 1989, it wasn't until he was researching for a book on activism that he learned about Keith Jackson. He said, quote, the story of what happened to Keith Jackson got much less attention than the Oval Office address, end quote, Davis said. Quote, this is just one person's life, but it is a window into how damaging the war on drugs was to many people, end quote. Okay? He added that Bush's involvement tends to be forgotten in the history of the war on drugs. Now, the DEA did not arrest Keith Jackson until after George H.W. Bush's speech aired, with agents simply hoping the team would not hear about it. Okay? But Keith Jackson was arrested, and two hung juries later, prosecutors finally secured a conviction in 1990 on 3 counts of selling cocaine in 2 locations around his neighborhood. He had been acquitted of charges in the Lafayette Park sale. U.S. District Judge Stanley Sporkin, S-P-O-R-K-I-N, urged Keith Jackson to ask George H.W. Bush to commute his sentence, which the judge considered too harsh. Sporkin was bound by law to hand down the mandatory 10 years, even though Jackson had no prior criminal record. Quote, he used you in the sense of making a big drug speech, Sporkin said, per the Washington Post. Quote, but he's a decent man, a man of great compassion. Maybe he can find a way to reduce at least some of that sentence, end quote. Now, Keith Jackson's sentence was not commuted. He was released in 1998, according to the Washington City paper. Okay, so check out this article from HuffingtonPost.com. George H.W. Bush, White House once ordered drug buy from teen for presidential TV stunt. Okay, that's from HuffingtonPost.com.